Berkeley is no stranger to protests. In the 1960s, UofC Berkeley was the center point of the free speech movement, with iconic photographs emerging from the period of hippie students holding up free speech signs. In the 2010s, UofC Berkeley is also a center point of the free speech movement, though in a different way. Iconic photos now consist of hipster students burning free speech signs. Since Trump's election, UofC Berkeley, like other left-leaning locations in the United States, have collectively lost their minds. On February 1st, when conservative talking head and flamboyantly gay Trump supporter Milo Yiannopoulos was scheduled to give a speech on campus, approximately 1,500 people showed up to peacefully protest, as is their right to do so. However, approximately 150 members of the Black Bloc, dressed head to toe in black in order to appear threatening and conceal their identities, infiltrated the crowd with weapons and began to incite violence. These individuals, who claim to be part of either Antifa or BAM, otherwise known as By Any Means Necessary, attacked both the crowd and the police, threw fireworks, and lit the place on fucking fire. After Milo's event was cancelled due to the violence, the crowd moved off campus into the city of Berkeley proper, damaging property in the downtown area. On March 4th, the aptly named March for Trump went down at multiple locations across the USA. As expected, the Berkeley protest turned violent even before it began, with Black Bloc members attacking the pro-Trump camp. This is when Based Stickman first became known to the internet. On April 15th, the battle for Berkeley began. Having realized that the reason the Black Bloc had been so effective at turning the other rallies violent was because they came armed and prepared for a fight. So, the right-wing group The Oath Keepers organized a pro-Trump rally, and also decided to come prepared for a fight. The ensuing event was a shit show, with both sides repeatedly clashing with weapons, and multiple arrests and confiscations made by the police, most notably a former professor attacking a student with a bike lock. On August 27th, between 2,000 and 4,000 people attended a rally against hate, which remained largely peaceful until 100 Black Bloc members smuggled in weapons, bypassing the 500-strong police security checks, and began attacking the small number of right-wing counter-protesters. The Berkeley police chief ordered his officers to abandon the park, stating that having the police confront the Black Bloc would have only led to more violence. Antifa members also threatened to attack journalists documenting their actions at this event. If I haven't made it clear yet, Berkeley is a fucking powder keg, and the students would rather restrict free speech in what they'd call extreme cases, instead of letting it flourish. So when conservative pundit Ben Shapiro decided to give a speech at UofC Berkeley on September 14th, I don't think a single person was surprised that counter-protests sprung up, with some of them erupting into violence. Let's take a look at what went down. Here's the chant of some of the counter-protesters. If you couldn't make that out, they were saying, "Speech is violent, we will not be silent." Now, I've discussed the slippery slope of problems that come about when speech is equated to violence, when criticism of idea is equated to attack on a person, most notably in my video, The Free Speech Problem. Here's the cliff notes of my criticism. If speech is considered to be violent, then offense is assault. And if a hypothetical right to not be offended is like the right to not be assaulted, or if it is more paramount than the right to free speech, then any person can censor any speech they like, even legitimate criticism, on the grounds of offense. But even beyond all that, isn't your chant completely self-defeating? If speech is violent, then the one thing you should be is silent, you idiots.
Put your fist in the air with me and repeat after me. In the name of humanity. We refuse to accept a fascist America. We will not be silent. We will not accommodate. We will not collaborate. We will not normalize it. We will rise up until these fascists are off our streets, out of our campuses, and out of the White House. And out of the White House. November 4th. We come in the streets. And stay in the streets. Until Trump and Pence and their whole regime are gone. Night after night. Day after day. November 4th. It begins. November 4th. It begins.
I wonder if these fools realize that a fascist regime wouldn't actually let them say what they're saying or do what they're doing. Oh well, November 4th video coming up. Thank you, Antifa, for maintaining my burgeoning YouTube career. Here's a UofC Berkeley grad student complaining that first-year students shouldn't have to be exposed to police or security or barricades on campus.
I'm just a poet, okay? But I walk into my classroom with freshmen just now, 2 hours ago, and they ask me, why are there barricades on campus? Why is there a police force on campus? These people don't know. This event has nothing to do with them. And the campus is completely being taken away from students who have every right to access. I don't think my students should have to be confronted with a militarized police force on campus. I don't think they should have to face threats, potential violence, mayhem, helicopters circling almost every week.
Well, sorry, sweetheart, but these first-year students are legally adults. And if they can't cope with reality yet, university is probably the best place to start learning that skill.
And who's to blame? I think Chancellor.
Oh yeah, it's the university chancellor's fault for allowing Ben Shapiro to give his talk. It's not people who have threatened him and incited violence for the past 10 months at any high-profile conservative gathering, oh no. I mean, Ben might have given a talk at UofC Berkeley back in 2016 and not needed a single bit of security at all. While this time the university had to spend $600,000 on security officers, on bodyguards, on barricades and other defensive measures. But that's all just Ben's fault. If Ben just wasn't there, there would be no need for violence at all. And I just have to ask, what was Ben Shapiro wearing when she was raped?
So, under the guise of free speech, they're trying to make their events seem legitimate and they're trying to sow doubts about what's the right moral thing to do. And they always invoke John Stuart Mill about their free speech arguments, which means that apparently you're able to say whatever you want, but you can't go to physical violence. Okay, fine, free marketplace of ideas, every idea has equal value, that's bullshit. Okay?
You don't understand what the free marketplace of ideas is. And I know you don't understand it because the free marketplace of ideas is not about every idea having equal value. The free marketplace of ideas is about giving every idea a platform and then allowing the ones with the greatest value to naturally convince people through their merits. It's about disproving bad ideas, not preventing them from being heard.
And I'm really sick of all this faulty reasoning and people trying to pull blinds over other people's eyes and trying to influence naive young students who don't know what any of this is about. Okay, Ben Shapiro might have gone to Harvard Law School and he can sound reasonable, but it's up to us to teach people how to go past this seeming facade. It's not rationality, it's fascism, it's irrational, and it's dangerous.
You heard it here, the bald-faced truth. This might as well be their fucking slogan. It's not rationality, it's fascism. When somebody talks about rationality, they see it as fascist, presumably because their ideology is irrational and can be defeated by reasoned thinking. Lauren Southern was down in the crowd, recording things on the street, as she is known to do. Things were actually pretty quiet, with Lauren making quips to her livestream chat room every once in a while, until she bumped into this woman. That's Yvette Falarka, and there's enough on her to be its entire fucking video. Maybe in the future, but for now, here's what you need to know. She's a big part of the radical violent left-wing group by any means necessary. Let's see what she has to say for herself.
Carl Chapman had to run away behind a whole flank of cops! And if it wasn't for all these cops protecting him, he would have been dealt with by this crowd!
Protecting you!
He's a fucking coward! He's a fascist! And this one right here, she's another one! Right over here!
Uh-oh, she's noticed you, Lauren. She's noticed that you're half her age and twice as good looking. She's blaming you for her squandering her amazing Asian genes.
Right over here!
Right over here! Right over here!
What does being dealt with mean?
Fascist act! Get out! You're not welcome here!
We're not your middle school students.
I'm allowed to walk here.
Welcome here!
Yeah, we're not your middle school students.
You fascists go off our street! Off our street!
Fascist scum! Off our street!
Is that all you can say?
Fascist scum!
Come on, man, give me some reason, some evidence. Oh, listen, I just want to talk.
Alright! Suck it!
Wait, what the fuck is on this guy's head? Did he show up to the protest cosplaying as Emo Toad?
You're not doing anything. This is
is working, guys. I think it's fallen through.
Won the election because all you can do is chant.
As somebody on the outside, here's what this looks and sounds like. This guy here in the camo hat, he's doing his best to talk, and these people are simply chanting past him. They're intimidating and united, sure, but they're also mindless.
Whoa! Yvette just pushed me. Excuse me, Yvette just pushed me.
Off our streets.
No, I just. Oh, you did? Okay, well, you just admitted to assaulting someone, so.
Oh geez, I hope she didn't leave a grease stain, Lauren. Celeste Paradise was attacked while at the protest as well. She gave her account of events to Scrabblebag Shooter in a video interview.
So, like, where exactly were y'all? Like, y'all were obviously in, you know, I thought it was around, like, you know, right by the campus, pretty much.
Yeah, we were standing in front of a Walgreens, and at this point, the whole rally was winding down, so I had my guard down, and we were talking to other people. There were kids. It was wonderful people. Someone was taking a picture of our sign, and then someone came up and grabbed the sign, and I tried to hold on to it, and as I was dragged away holding on to it, two guys just grabbed me, spun me away from the girl who ran off with the sign, and I was in the middle of the crowd all of a sudden, and then they slammed me down, and my head hit the pavement twice. It was awful. I didn't trip, you know, it was awful, and then I couldn't see for a minute. I was dizzy. I couldn't get up right away, and by the time I could even think about it, it was this maelstrom of people, but it was awful. I got separated from my friends. Everyone was screaming at me. There were no friendlies. The cops were all around me, and it was a terrible position because you know, everyone was just yelling at me and taking pictures with their phones and not trying to help me, and I just wanted to die. I was so, you know, embarrassed.
Yeah, well, I mean, I understand, but it's not your fault. I mean, you definitely don't need to feel embarrassed for that. I mean, just for being a victim like that.
And a lot of press came up to me, rather from Channel 4 came up, all kinds of different bloggers, and they all seemed astonished and that I would have a sign that said what it said.
They were astonished that you would have a sign that was welcoming Ben Shapiro, and you were in the middle of downtown, like a first world American city.
Yeah, like the chancellor of this campus invited this person to speak, and I had a sign saying, "Yes, Shalom Shapiro, we welcome you," and everybody was like, "You're brave." I'm astonished by this.
Shalom Shapiro is something it takes.
And just so we don't have to take her word for it, Ria Bhattacharjee of MSNBC managed to catch part of the event.
So, a medical emergency, you guys are taking pictures. Really? She fell. You're taking pictures of her.
Man, you got opinions, it's not the platform.
That was a little decency.
That's what happens when you're a Nazi.
George Kelly was also on the scene, taking photos during the daytime protests. He got pictures of violent protesters getting arrested, along with anti-Ben Shapiro chalk messages on the sidewalk. You know, guys, if you're going to protest somebody giving a speech at your university, maybe you should be familiar enough with him that you know how to spell his name. What, is Ben gonna try and sell me a libertarian-branded Sharpie at this event? At least the police were actually arresting people this time. At previous events, somebody higher up prevented the police from stepping in and keeping the peace. But this time, the police were, as Ben himself put it, unshackled. Multiple arrests were made for attempting to bring weapons into the protest areas, as well as battery of a police officer by one very happy hipster girl. Around dyed hair, beware, after all. Another arrestee was involved in Hillary Clinton's campaign. I guess she just can't pick a winning side in any fight. But in the end, the protest was significantly less violent and destructive, largely thanks to a legitimate police presence. When it was all said and done, the best the counter-protesters got was looking like they're all having an orgasm in unison. What actually was it that Ben Shapiro said during his speech that caused such a ridiculous overreaction from the protesters? What kind of vile hate speech could he have been spouting to warrant any of this? Well, let me cut his speech down into an abridged version.
I want to say thank you to the morons who put up that sign across the way. It says, "We say no to your white supremacist bullshit." Well, I say thank you because I also say no to white supremacist bullshit. And if you stick around long enough in this speech, you will hear me do exactly that. The problem is I also say no to your identity politics bullshit. There's a pathetic new movement arising all over the country, from Sacramento to Berkeley to Dallas to Charlottesville, and that movement says that speech is violence and must be treated as such. Antifa couldn't go anywhere without an ideology that runs broader than Antifa, without a group of people willing to look the other way. Well, what is the view that undergirds Antifa? What's the view that undergirds the hard left, many of whom celebrate Antifa or were doing so until it became politically unpalatable to do so? It's a view that America is a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad place. Right? Now, the truth is that America is an incredible place. It's the greatest place in the history of the world. It is the freest, most prosperous country, the most tolerant country in the history of planet Earth. This country is an incredible place full of opportunity. Nobody, by and large, cares enough about you to stop you from achieving your dreams. That means in a free country, if you fail, it is probably your own fault. If it is somebody else's fault, if somebody is actually trying to throw up obstacles in front of you in a way that is unjust and bigoted, point out the specific instance so we can all side with you. We all want to be on the same side. We all want to help out. When somebody is a racist and trying to stop you, we all want to sound off and stop that too. The idea, however, that America as a whole owns your failure when you can't point to specific problems does not wash. Now listen, you'd be a fool not to acknowledge, or a liar not to acknowledge, the history of racism in America. Everybody acknowledges that if you have half a brain. Of course, slavery, Jim Crow, awful, evil treatment at the hands of awful, evil people. We all acknowledge this. We all acknowledge the collective sin of the United States in promulgating this, and the individual sins, more importantly, of the people who actually promulgated this stuff. Okay, we all get that. But that's not what we're talking about. Now we're talking about now. Because I wasn't born when Jim Crow was in place. I wasn't an adult when Jim Crow was in place. I know that I'm not a racist, and I know I haven't acted in a racist manner. And I would bet you money that the people in this room haven't acted in a racist manner, that they haven't held slaves or voted for Jim Crow. I will bet you money that is the case. You cannot fix past injustices with current injustices. The only way to fix past injustices is with individual freedom. That's it.
Yeah, that's it. Just generic conservative and libertarian talking points, all of them qualified with rebukes of bigotry and valid explanations. I don't agree with everything Ben Shapiro said during this talk, but not only do I defend his right to say it, I even think he did a good job at presenting his arguments. And that's why Ben and people like him are protested so strongly. Not because he's violent, or because he incites violence, or because he's racist or sexist or a white supremacist. And no, Tariq, he's not faking his Jewishness. It's because he holds well-reasoned positions that they are ideologically and emotionally opposed to, and they cannot use appeals to emotion or ideological rhetoric to adequately combat a position founded in reason. This doesn't mean that I agree with him, I often don't, but the only way to argue against his well-reasoned positions are with other well-reasoned positions of your own. And these Berkeley protesters? A lack of reason is probably their biggest failing. It's why earlier on this clown said it's not rationality, it's fascism.
It's not rationality, it's fascism.
They know that reason is their Achilles heel, so reason must become fascism. Rational thinkers must become fascists. And debate between reasonable people holding reasoned yet opposing viewpoints without relying on ideology must become a hotbed of bigotry, to which the only reaction is violence. But yeah, Ben's a conservative libertarian. I'm a left-leaning liberal centrist. I do agree with him on a few things in his speech. For example, the current black community situation overwhelmingly being caused by fathers not sticking around to raise their kids. Or that the gender pay gap is largely a result of women's choices, not as individuals, but as a class of millions of people. Or that free speech must be considered paramount. However, I disagree with him, for example, on abortion rights. And it always makes me fucking cringe to watch young lefties go at him over abortion, because there's always way better arguments than they put forward. Like this guy, for example.
My question was about abortion, and I just wanted to know, why exactly do you think a first trimester fetus has moral value?
Okay, so a first trimester fetus has moral value because whether you consider it a potential human life or a full-on human life, it has more value than just a cluster of cells. If left to its natural processes, it will grow into a baby. So the real question is, where do you draw the line? So you're gonna draw the line at the heartbeat, because it's very hard to draw the line at the heartbeat. There are people who are adults who are alive because of a pacemaker. They need some sort of outside force generating their heartbeat. Okay, are you gonna do it based on brain function? Okay, well, what about people who are in a coma? Should we just kill them? Right? The problem is, anytime you draw any line other than the inception of the child, you end up drawing a false line that can also be applied to people who are adults. So either human life has intrinsic value or it doesn't. I think we both agree that adult human life has intrinsic value. Can we start from that premise?
I believe that sentience is what gives something moral value, not necessarily being a human alone.
Okay,
because,
so
argument.
When you're asleep, can I stab you?
I'm still considered sentient when I'm asleep.
Okay, if you are in a coma from which you may awake, can I stab you?
Well then, no. I guess not. I mean,
I'm glad you answered that because I have no interest in actually murdering you.
But that's still potential sentience, and it's still a potential.
I agree. It is potential sentience. You know what else is potential sentience? Being a fetus.
He got schooled on the sentient argument, but not because he was wrong, because he conceded a point that he shouldn't have conceded. First of all, he wasn't using the term sentience correctly. Sentience is the capacity to feel, perceive, or experience subjectively, and this is something that almost every living thing can do on some level. It's very clear to anybody that, for example, a dog or a cat can feel, perceive, and experience subjectively. In fact, an argument from sentience is actually more helpful for the anti-abortion side of things, because suffering can only exist if sentience exists. What most normies call sentience, generally due to the common misuse of the term in Star Trek and other forms of sci-fi pop culture, is actually called sapience. And it's clear from the context of the debate he was referring to sapience. Sapience refers to a consciousness that is beyond the practical wisdom of survival, the stuff that animals have, the stuff that comes from feeling, perceiving, and experiencing the world. It also encompasses self-knowledge, interconnectedness, theoretical wisdom, conditioned orientation of the states of the mind, things like judgment, compassion, and culture. And this is where he actually has won over Ben Shapiro. An adult human does not lose sapience when they fall asleep or fall into a coma. And a fetus clearly doesn't yet have sapience. But the problem with that argument is that you can also say that, say, a 6-month-old also doesn't have sapience. If sapience were the judge of when it is no longer acceptable to have an abortion, the date may very well be set several years after birth. And even if that makes logical sense, I don't think you're seriously going to find people willing to accept that benchmark in society. This is why, for example, we find the McDonald's manager who decided to give birth in the bathroom and flush the kid down the toilet, claiming the kid was a miscarriage, to be an absolute monster. And Ben's arguments for the other guidelines are convincing too. If we use the lack of a heartbeat in an underdeveloped fetus, that would remove personhood rights from the people who naturally lack heartbeats and require pacemakers or other marvels of medical technology in order to stay alive. If we use the birthday as a guideline, even though, really, we use the birthday for a lot of other guidelines in society, that would mean a viable baby in the days leading up to a natural birth still lacks personhood rights, and can be aborted as a non-person. And if we take the feminist perspective, that the framing of the question itself is wrong, that the issue isn't the personhood rights of the baby, but the bodily autonomy of the mother, while that argument is actually pretty sound, it feels like it's dodging the question. But there's also a problem with Ben's argument as well, and let me play back where he brings it up.
Okay, so a first trimester fetus has moral value because whether you consider it a potential human life or a full-on human life, it has more value than just a cluster of cells. If left to its natural processes, it will grow into a baby.
Believe it or not, a fertilized egg, when left to its natural processes, may or may not become a baby. In the Johns Hopkins Manual of Gynecology and Obstetrics, I think it's pronounced obstetrics, 4th edition, on page 438, it states that 30 to 40% of all conceptions result in miscarriage, and that 80% of those losses happen before 12 weeks in, before any symptoms of pregnancy occur. In the study Second Trimester Pregnancy Loss, published in the American Family Physician, it is estimated that as many as half of all fertilized eggs may spontaneously abort themselves long before the woman knows she is even pregnant. This chance increases if within the first month of conception, the woman smokes, drinks, takes hot baths or uses a hot tub, or exercises. The honest truth is, and this speaks to a much larger biological and evolutionary conversation beyond the scope of this video, humans are imperfect creatures, and our stuff doesn't always work perfectly every time. When left to our natural processes, our eyes are intended to see at a specific level of detail and distance, but they often don't. When left to our natural processes, our digestive system is meant to break down fuel and pass solid waste, but it often doesn't. When left to our natural processes, parts of our bodies are clearly intended to perform specific functions. Sometimes they do. Sometimes we're born with a defect, and they don't work properly. Sometimes we abuse our bodies, and they don't work properly. Sometimes we unintentionally disable our bodies through innocuous behavior. And sometimes they just don't do what they're supposed to do. Ben's argument is that if a fetus is left to its natural processes, it will become a baby, is flawed. A more accurate statement is that a fetus is designed to grow into a baby, and that if given the chance, it may well do just that, but that it's not guaranteed. And it may be just as likely for the zygote to disassemble itself and disperse into a slightly heavier than average period, through no fault of anyone. It's maddening to think about sometimes, but biology isn't a perfect science like physics. It's still clearly a science, of course, but it's not as simple as A leading to B leading to C all the time. So, when Ben dismisses the argument of the heartbeat or the argument of birth, based on how it may affect adults who find themselves in similar situations, his conception argument can also be dismissed on those merits. If life begins at conception, and we confer personhood rights to an egg fertilized, say, 1 hour ago, who is to blame for the murder of that egg when the woman's body rejects it 5 days later? Who would even know that a murder had occurred? And if you think that this is an unreal scenario, that something like this would just never happen, let's take a look at the court ruling in Alabama that made all women personally to blame for any harm their actions may cause to a fetus from the moment of conception. In Alabama, if you're a woman and you smoke, drink, drive above the speed limit, step into a hot tub, or do anything that may cause a fetus harm, including both harm after birth and early-term miscarriages, even miscarriages unknown to you that they are happening, even though potentially half of all pregnancies naturally end in such a miscarriage, you are legally liable. And because to them life begins at conception, and there is no accurate way of detecting pregnancy that early, it is simply assumed by the law that all women not currently on their period are in a classification called potentially pregnant, and may be charged by police for potentially endangering their unborn child's life for drinking or smoking while not on the rag. In my opinion, this is an unacceptable state of affairs, and it stems from accepting the life begins at conception argument as a legal basis. As an aside, the libertarian demon sitting on my shoulder is telling me as I write this script that we should take up the Ferengis position on pregnancy.
Well, to get her off caffeine, not poison her.
But you make me sound like some kind of addict.
She has maybe 2 Ractogenos a day.
Look, I just don't want my son to be born with a caffeine habit, that's all.
You're being ridiculous. Why does pregnancy always make men hysterical?
Excuse me, this is not the first baby I've had.
Excuse me, Keiko had Molly.
It's not up to you to tell Kira what she can and cannot do.
She is carrying his child. He should have some say.
As the lessee, he does have certain rights. Back home, pregnancy is considered a rental.
Rental.
Yeah, why not? Let's treat abortion like an eviction. A landlord certainly isn't concerned that a tenant may die when they evict them after 9 months of unpaid rent. Why should a woman be? I've spent way too much of this video talking about abortion, when it's about Ben Shapiro's speech. It's just that this back and forth is probably the most blatant example of Ben's flawed reasoning. The questioner had great avenues with which to attack Ben's position that he let slip by, and I was actually pulling my hair out watching this. Oh well, at least he did better than this woman.
So my question is, since you believe abortion is the same as murder, do you believe women who get abortions, even when their lives or the child's life isn't in danger, should be put on trial for murder? Yes or no?
I think abortionists should be put on trial.
But I mean,
I don't think that women should be put on trial for a couple of different reasons. So the first reason is because I don't think that it is effective in deterring abortion to put women on trial for the killing of the unborn. The second reason is because I think that we in our society have unfortunately gotten to such a point that an entire generation have been indoctrinated to believe, particularly an entire generation of women, since that's what we're talking about here, have been indoctrinated to believe that a baby is a polyp, and so when they remove it, I'm not sure there's the actual mens rea necessary, the actual criminal intent necessary for a prosecution. So when we're talking about, the typical pro-life position here has been that the woman is a victim in abortion nearly as much as the baby is. That there's an entire abortion industry that is geared toward teaching women that babies are not babies, and that getting a baby aborted is in fact a betterment of their life. So no, I'm not in favor of prosecuting women for abortions.
But I mean, there are a lot of women who do have the intent, right? Like if a woman goes to an abortion clinic, they are ordering the murder of their child, in your opinion, like what you would say. So
well,
do they not
again,
have the mens rea?
So I gave you 2 reasons. One, a public policy one, and one, like, you'd have to show me, you'd really have to show me the case of a woman who went in there and said, I know this is a baby, cut its brains out. If that's happening, then that is infanticide. I mean, that's like, wouldn't you acknowledge? I mean, if a woman walked in with a baby that was 1 day old and said, here's my baby, kill it, wouldn't you put her on trial? But that's not what we're talking about. In the vast majority of abortions, the truth is, unfortunately, that women don't actually believe they are killing a child. They actually believe they are killing something that is non-human and is the same thing as removing a tumor or something.
So, but are you saying that you don't think abortion is murder then? Because there are.
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that I'm saying that the vast majority of women who obtain abortions don't think that abortion is murder, and intent is a fundamental element in any criminal prosecution. I feel horrible for women who have abortions. I think that it's terrible for them. I think it's a lot worse for the baby.
Yes, just keep talking past him. I'm sure that will make your argument more convincing. I know how it looks when two men have a more productive conversation on abortion than a man and a woman. But Jesus, lady, you need to have an argument and not just a moral pontification. In any case, I'd highly recommend you watch Ben's speech, and the Q&A section afterward, even if you disagree with him. A few days before the event, UofC Berkeley's Chancellor, Carol Christ, said, "Call toxic speech out for what it is, don't shout it down, for in shouting it down, you collude in the narrative that universities are not open to all speech. Respond to hate speech with more speech." And this is probably the best response to Ben Shapiro and others like him, even if you vehemently disagree with their positions. He's not a hate monger, he's not a bigot. He generally doesn't hold positions that aren't ideological in nature. If you disagree, challenge him, because if you ignore him, then you can't present your counter-arguments. It may end up being a tradition to include a Game of Thrones quote in every single video that I do, considering how well they seem to have fit in the past few. When you tear out a man's tongue, you are not proving him a liar. You're only telling the world that you fear what he might say. I don't fear what Ben Shapiro has to say. I disagree with it, but I don't fear it. In fact, my greatest criticism of Ben Shapiro's speech is that he recycled the entire thing from his appearance on the Joe Rogan podcast. You'd think for $600,000 in security he could have written something new. Alright guys, that does it for me. Thanks for watching today. I was actually about 2/3 done another video when the Ben Shapiro thing went down, so I put that on pause and did this one instead. I'm going to return to that other project and release it in short order. Special thanks to everybody who supports this show on Patreon. You are what make these video releases possible. If you want to keep up with what I do, check out those social media links on the screen right now. And also feel free to check out my gaming channel, No Talent Gaming. I'll see you later, guys. I love you.
So stupid.